Get out of my courtroom before I have you thrown in a cell for contempt." Judge Dane Steele's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the murmuring gallery. He pointed a trembling, vein-popping finger at the young black girl standing defiantly near the defense table. "This is a court of law, not a playground for delinquents. Take your hoodie and your attitude back to the streets where they belong." Rylan Black didn't flinch. She just smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that didn't reach her eyes, and whispered, "Oh, Your Honor, you're going to wish you hadn't said that." The atmosphere inside the oak-paneled chamber of the Superior Court was suffocating, thick with the scent of floor wax and old prejudices. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the high, grime-streaked windows, indifferent to the lives being ruined below. To the casual observer, it was just another Tuesday docket. To the young man shackled in the defendant's chair, it was the end of the world. Sawyer Knox sat hunched over, his orange jumpsuit contrasting sharply with his pale, terrified skin. He was barely 20, a kid who had made a mistake, caught up in a system that seemed designed to crush him. He looked small, defeated, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room, praying for a miracle that hadn't arrived. The gallery was sparsely populated. A few bored retirees, a weeping mother clutching a rosary, and a handful of court regulars. But all eyes were currently fixed on the bench, where the Honorable Dane Steele presided like a king on a crumbling throne. Judge Steele was a man who wore his authority like a suit of armor. With silver hair slicked back severely and a jawline that seemed carved from granite, he projected an image of unshakable righteousness. But those who practiced in his court knew better. Steele was impatient, arrogant, and possessed a deep-seated disdain for anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of respectable. "Next case," Steele barked, barely looking up from the file in front of him. "State versus Knox. Possession with intent. Let's make this quick. I have a tea time at 3. Prosecutor Freya Hale stood up, smoothing her impeccable pinstripe skirt. She was sharp-featured and ambitious, a predator who smelled blood in the water. "Ready for the state, Your Honor. We are seeking the maximum sentence. The evidence is irrefutable." "And for the defense?" Steele asked, his tone bored. A frantic, overworked public defender, Cora Sterling, shuffled her papers, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. "Present, Your Honor. However, the defendant has informed me that he has retained private counsel." Steele looked up, his eyebrows knitting together. "Private counsel? This kid?" He let out a dry, mocking chuckle. "And where is this high-powered attorney? The Invisible Man?" That was when the heavy double doors at the back of the room creaked open. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle was not a man in a bespoke suit. It was a young black woman who looked like she should be in a college library, or perhaps a high school cafeteria. Rylan Black was slight of build, with voluminous natural curls pulled back into a puff. She wore a dark gray hoodie under a casual blazer, distressed jeans, and pristine white sneakers. She carried a battered leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a distinct aura of calm that felt entirely out of place in the predatory environment. She didn't rush. Her steps were measured, silent against the carpet. Judge Steele watched her approach, his expression morphing from confusion to irritation. He leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly against the block. "Young lady, the gallery is for spectators. If you are here for the defendant, take a seat in the back. Do not approach the well." Rylan ignored him. She continued walking, her gaze fixed not on the judge, but on Sawyer Knox. When she reached the railing, she offered the terrified boy a subtle nod. "I said sit down," Steele bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Bailiff, remove this girl if she doesn't find a seat in 5 seconds. Rylan stopped. She was now standing right next to Cora Sterling, the public defender. Rylan placed her bag on the table with a heavy thud. "I'm not a spectator, Your Honor," Rylan said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but it carried a steel core that vibrated through the room. "And I'm not here to sit in the back." Steele's face turned a shade of crimson. He looked at the bailiff, a hulking man named Officer Miller, who was already reaching for his belt. Then he looked back at Rylan, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure disdain. "Is that so?" Steele sneered, leaning back in his chair, deciding to entertain himself with this disruption before crushing it. "Then are you lost, sweetheart? Did you wander in from a field trip? This is a courtroom, not a guidance counselor's office." Freya Hale, the prosecutor, snickered audibly, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Perhaps she's looking for the juvenile traffic court, Your Honor. Down the hall, second door on the left." Rylan didn't blush. She didn't stutter. She slowly unzipped her messenger bag. "I know exactly where I am, Judge Steele. I am here for Mr. Knox." "Mr. Knox doesn't need a cheerleader," Steele spat. "He needs a miracle. Now, last warning, sit down or get out." Rylan looked up at the judge, her dark eyes unreadable. She had anticipated this. In fact, she had counted on it. The underestimation was her weapon, and Dane Steele was walking right onto the blade. "I'm not his cheerleader," Rylan said, her voice rising just enough to be heard clearly by the court reporter, Elise Vale, whose fingers hovered uncertainly over her steno machine. "Then who are you?" Steele demanded, his patience evaporating. "I," Rylan began, reaching into her bag, "am the reason you're going to want to check your docket more carefully next time." The tension in the room thickened, heavy and suffocating like a wool blanket in summer. Steele stared at Rylan, blinking as if he couldn't process the audacity standing before him. He was used to fear. He was used to "yes, Your Honor" and "no, Your Honor." He was not used to a teenager in sneakers meeting his gaze with the level stare of a combat veteran. "You have 5 seconds to explain yourself," Steele hissed, "before I find you in contempt of court and have you locked up for obstructing justice." "I am appearing on behalf of Sawyer Knox," Rylan stated calmly, pulling a thin file folder from her bag. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, followed immediately by a ripple of laughter. It started with Freya Hale, a sharp barking sound, and was quickly picked up by the bailiff and even a few people in the gallery. "Appearing?" Steele laughed, a cruel grating sound. "You? Appearing as what? His sister? His girlfriend? Because you certainly aren't appearing as counsel." "Why is that, Your Honor?" Rylan asked, her tone dangerously polite. "Is there something about me that suggests incompetence?" Steele leaned over the bench, his face contorted with a mix of amusement and disgust. "Everything about you suggests incompetence, little girl. Your clothes, your age, your attitude. We have standards in this court. We require a law degree for starters, a bar license, not a permission slip from your mother." Sawyer Knox looked up at Rylan, his eyes wide with panic. "Rylan," he whispered urgently, "maybe you shouldn't. He's going to hurt you." Rylan placed a calming hand on Sawyer's shoulder, ignoring the judge for a split second. "Trust me, Sawyer. Keep your head down." She turned back to Steele. "I assure you the standards of this court are well known to me." "Enough of this charade," Freya Hale interjected, stepping forward. She looked at Rylan as one might look at a cockroach on a wedding cake. "Your Honor, the state moves to proceed. Mr. Knox clearly has no legitimate private counsel. The public defender is present. Let's not waste the taxpayers' money entertaining this child's delusions of grandeur." "Agreed," Steele said, banging his gavel. "Ms. Sterling, you are representing the defendant. Ms. whatever your name is, step away from the defense table immediately or be removed by force." "My name is Rylan Black," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. She didn't move an inch. "I don't care if your name is the Queen of Sheba," Steele shouted, his face purpling. "Officer Miller, remove her!" The bailiff stepped forward, his hand heavy on Rylan's arm. "Come on, miss. Don't make this ugly." Rylan shrugged off his hand with a sharp, precise movement. Do not touch me, officer. That is assault on an officer of the court. The room froze again. Even Steele paused, his mouth hanging slightly open. Officer of the court? Steele repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. Now you're impersonating an attorney? Do you know that's a felony? I can have you charged right now. I can ruin your life before it's even started. You seem very eager to ruin lives without seeing the evidence, Your Honor, Ryland shot back. Is that how you plan to handle my client's case, assumption before fact? Strike that from the record, Steele roared at the court reporter. Elise Vale flinched, her fingers freezing. Steele turned his fury entirely on Ryland. You listen to me, you insolent little brat. I have been sitting on this bench for 20 years. I have sent men to death row. I have presided over cases that made national headlines. I will not be lectured on facts by a teenager playing dress-up. He stood up, towering over the bench. You are mocking this institution. You are mocking the law. And frankly, you are mocking the dignity of everyone in this room. The only one mocking the law here, Ryland said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder, is the man assuming a black woman in a hoodie can't possibly know the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Freya Hale looked scandalized. Your Honor, she's playing the race card! In your courtroom! Steele looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. That is it. Officer Miller, arrest her. Contempt of court. Impersonating an officer. Disturbing the peace. Throw the book at her. I want her in a holding cell until she learns some respect. Officer Miller grabbed Ryland again, harder this time, twisting her arm behind her back. Sawyer cried out, Stop! Leave her alone! Quiet, defendant, Steele snapped, or you'll join her with an extra 6 months added to your sentence. Ryland didn't struggle against the bailiff. She didn't scream. She simply looked at Elise Vale, the court reporter. Are you getting all of this, Elise? Every word? The threats? The refusal to examine credentials? The bias? Elise looked terrified, her eyes darting between the judge and Ryland. She gave a microscopic nod. Good, Ryland said, wincing slightly as Miller applied pressure to her wrist. Because the Judicial Review Board is going to love the transcript. Get her out of here, Steele screamed, losing all composure. As Miller began to drag her toward the side exit, Ryland shouted, Wait! I have a motion to file! Motion denied, Steele yelled back. You have no standing! I have standing under the State Bar Act, Section 6068. Ryland's voice rang out, clear and authoritative, stopping the bailiff in his tracks. And under the Supreme Court ruling in Ferretta v. California, denying a defendant their chosen counsel is a reversible error that will mistrial this entire case. The citation hung in the air. It wasn't the babbling of a crazy person. It was specific. It was accurate. It was... Steele froze. Freya Hale frowned, tilting her head. Let her go, Miller, Steele said, his voice quiet, wary now. Bring her back to the table. Miller released her. Ryland straightened her blazer, smoothed her hoodie, and walked back to the defense table with the dignity of a queen returning to her throne. You know case law, Steele said, his eyes narrowing. Impressive. You memorized a Wikipedia page. That doesn't make you a lawyer. No, Ryland agreed, reaching into her messenger bag again. It doesn't. She pulled out a small, rectangular object and slapped it down on the defense table. It made a sharp clack against the wood. But this does. The object on the table was a standard State Bar identification card. But in the dim light of the courtroom, it looked like a live grenade. Judge Steele stared at it from the bench. He didn't pick it up immediately. It was as if he was afraid it might bite him. He looked at Ryland, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the intelligence burning in her eyes, the set of her jaw, the absolute lack of fear. Bring that here, Steele commanded the bailiff. Miller took the card and handed it up to the judge. Steele put on his reading glasses, his movements slow, deliberate. He squinted at the card. He flipped it over. He checked the holographic seal. Rylan Black, Steele read aloud, his voice devoid of the earlier mockery. Admitted to the bar 6 months ago. He looked up, confusion warring with his anger. You're 19? I graduated high school at 12, Rylan said, her voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. College at 15, law school at 18, top of my class at Yale. I passed the bar on my first attempt with one of the highest scores in state history. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Freya Hale's jaw had actually dropped. Cora Sterling, the public defender, was grinning behind her hand. Yale, Steele repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. And, Rylan continued, I am currently a junior associate at Sterling, Vance & Partners. Freya Hale gasped. Sterling, Vance & Partners was not just a law firm, it was the law firm. They handled corporate mergers, international disputes, and high-profile civil rights cases. They didn't step foot in a dingy superior court for a drug possession charge unless something massive was happening. Why is an associate from Sterling Vance defending a nobody like Sawyer Knox? Steele asked, trying to regain his footing. Pro bono charity work? Trying to build a resume? Sawyer Knox is my cousin, Rylan lied smoothly. Or perhaps it was a half-truth, a kinship of circumstance. But more importantly, Your Honor, I am here because I specialize in prosecutorial misconduct and judicial ethics violations. Steele bristled. Are you threatening this court, Ms. Black? I'm not threatening anyone, Your Honor. I'm stating the scope of my practice. Rylan walked around the table, taking command of the space. Now, if you are quite finished insulting my appearance, my age, and my race, I would like to formally enter my appearance as defense counsel for Mr. Knox, unless, of course, you'd like to continue mocking me on the record? I'm sure the Court of Appeals would find your earlier comments regarding my delusions fascinating. Steele's face went pale. He realized the trap he had walked into. He had abused, threatened, and humiliated a licensed attorney from a top-tier firm on the record. If she filed a complaint, it wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. It could be an inquiry. But Dane Steele was a narcissist, and narcissists do not back down when cornered. They attack. He tossed her ID card back onto the bench. Fine, so you're a prodigy. Good for you. But being a genius bookworm doesn't mean you know how to try a case in the real world. This isn't a classroom, Ms. Black. There are no gold stars here. I don't want a gold star, Judge, Rylan said, stepping up to the podium. I want a dismissal. Dismissal? Freya Hale scoffed, recovering her composure. On what grounds? We found the drugs in his locker. We have the search warrant. We have the chain of custody. This is an open and shut case. Is it? Rylan asked, turning to face the prosecutor. Because I've reviewed the discovery, and I found something very interesting about that search warrant. The warrant was signed by me, Steele snapped. It is perfectly valid. It was signed by you, yes, Rylan said, turning her gaze back to the judge. Based on an affidavit provided by Detective Miller, no relation to our bailiff, I assume. The affidavit cited an anonymous tip. Standard procedure, Hale argued. Usually, yes, Rylan agreed. Except I did a little digging into this anonymous tip. Or rather, the timestamp of the tip log at the precinct. Rylan pulled another document from her bag. This is a subpoenaed log from the dispatch server. It shows the tip came in at 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday the 4th. So? Steele waved a hand dismissively. So, Rylan continued, her voice sharpening, the police report states that the search of Mr. Knox's locker commenced at 1:45 p.m. on Tuesday the 4th. The courtroom went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a predator realizing it had stepped into a snare. 30 minutes before the tip was received, Rylan said, slamming the document onto the defense table, which means the search was conducted without probable cause. It was an illegal search. The drugs are fruit of the poisonous tree. And the warrant you signed, Your Honor? It was retroactive paperwork to cover up a civil rights violation. That's a clerical error, Freya Hale stammered, looking pale. A clerical error regarding the constitution rights of a citizen? Rylan raised an eyebrow. I don't think so. I moved to suppress all evidence obtained from the locker. And without the evidence, the state has no case. I move for immediate dismissal with prejudice. Steele stared at her. His hands were shaking. If he dismissed the case, he looked weak. If he denied the motion, she would appeal, and the timestamp discrepancy would prove he allowed an illegal search. He was trapped between his ego and the law. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you're smart, don't you? You think you can waltz into my town, into my court, and catch us on a technicality? The Fourth Amendment is not a technicality, Judge Steele, Ryland said, her voice ringing with the moral authority of a veteran litigator. It is the law you swore to uphold. Now rule on my motion. Steele grit his teeth. I will take the motion under advisement. We will recess for lunch. Court is adjourned until 1 p.m. He banged the gavel so hard the head nearly flew off. And Ms. Black, be in my chambers immediately. I'll be there, Ryland said coolly. With a witness. Steele stormed off the bench, his robes billowing behind him like a storm cloud. Freya Hale hurriedly gathered her files, shooting daggers at Ryland before rushing after the judge. Sawyer looked at Ryland, his mouth agape. You did it. You stopped him. Ryland turned to him, her expression softening. She wasn't the shark anymore. She was just a girl protecting her own. I didn't stop him, Sawyer. I just paused him. Now comes the hard part. The hard part? Sawyer whispered. Ryland looked toward the judge's chambers. Now I have to make sure he doesn't just destroy the case. I have to make sure he destroys himself. The judge's chambers were a shrine to his own ego. While the courtroom was drab and peeling, this inner sanctum was lush with mahogany bookshelves, plush leather chairs, and walls adorned with framed newspaper clippings of Dane Steele's greatest hits, verdicts that had sent men to prison for decades, headlines praising his zero-tolerance policies. The room smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke, an olfactory assertion of dominance. Ryland stood in the center of the Persian rug, refusing the seat Steele hadn't offered. Beside her stood Cora Sterling. The public defender looked ready to vomit, clutching her briefcase like a shield, but she remained upright, bolstered by Ryland's gravitational pull. Steele sat behind his massive desk, flanked by Freya Hale. The prosecutor was pacing, her heels digging into the carpet like claws. You have a lot of nerve, Steele began, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He wasn't yelling now. He was in deal-making mode, the dangerous quiet before a different kind of storm. Barging into my court, making a scene, accusing a decorated detective of perjury. I accused him of falsifying a timeline, Ryland corrected, her tone conversational. The perjury charge comes later, once he takes the stand and lies about it under oath. Freya Hale whipped around. You insolent— Save it, Freya. Steele cut her off. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. Look, Ms. Black, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to chalk up your performance out there to youthful exuberance. You're new. You want to make a splash. I get it. Yale teaches you the theory, but they don't teach you how the city actually works. And how does the city work, Judge? Ryland asked, tilting her head. It works on cooperation, Steele said smoothly. On understanding that sometimes the ends justify the means. We have a drug problem in this town. Sawyer Knox is part of that problem. Maybe the warrant wasn't perfect. Maybe the paperwork was a little hurried. But the boy had drugs in his locker. That is a fact. We are cleaning up the streets. By shredding the Constitution, Ryland countered. That's a very interesting definition of cleaning up. Steele's eyes hardened. Here is the offer. You withdraw your motion to suppress. You plead Knox out to simple possession. I'll give him 2 years probation. No jail time. He goes home today. Cora Sterling made a small noise of surprise. 2 years probation for intent to distribute was unheard of in Steele's court. It was a panic offer. That sounds generous, Ryland said. If my client were guilty. He is guilty, Freya snapped. We found the drugs. You found drugs planted in a locker that was opened illegally, Ryland corrected. And if I accept this deal, Sawyer has a felony record for the rest of his life. He loses his scholarship, he loses his future, so no. No deal. Steele slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the brass nameplate. You listen to me, you little upstart. You are playing a dangerous game. If you pursue this, I will bury you. I will sanction you for frivolous motions. I will file a complaint with the bar regarding your conduct. I will make sure every judge in this state knows your name and hates it. Ryland didn't blink. She turned to Cora. Ms. Sterling, you're witnessing this? Cora swallowed hard, then nodded. I am. The judge is threatening defense counsel with professional retaliation for refusing a plea deal. Steele laughed, a harsh barking sound. Her? She's a public defender in my court. She knows what happens if she crosses me. Isn't that right, Cora? He looked at Cora with eyes that promised career suicide. Cora trembled, her knuckles white. She looked at the powerful judge, then at the 19-year-old girl standing fearless beside her. Actually, Your Honor, Cora whispered, her voice shaking but audible. I recall the conversation exactly as Ms. Black stated. Steele's face twisted into a mask of pure betrayal. Get out, he whispered. Both of you, get out of my chambers before I have you dragged out. Gladly, Ryland said. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Judge, that tea time you mentioned earlier, you might want to cancel it. I'm adding 3 more witnesses to the list for tomorrow's hearing. Who? Steele demanded, standing up. The dispatcher who took the call, Ryland said. The school janitor who unlocked the locker, and the student who saw Detective Miller at the school an hour before the anonymous tip ever came in. She opened the door. Wear your best robe tomorrow, Your Honor. It's going to be a long day. The law library of Sterling, Vance and Partners was a different world from the grime of the courthouse. It was a cathedral of silence and glass overlooking the city skyline. But Ryland wasn't admiring the view. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes of files, with Sawyer Knox sitting nervously in a leather chair nearby. Ryland had bailed him out using her own funds, a move that raised eyebrows but was technically legal. She needed him close. She needed him to remember everything. Think, Sawyer, Ryland said, her eyes scanning a police report. Why you? Why that day? Steele and Hale are terrified. They offered probation immediately. That means they aren't just protecting a conviction stat. They're protecting a lie. Sawyer rubbed his temples. I don't know, Rye, I told you. I went to practice. I came back. The cops were there. They opened my locker and there was this bag of pills. I've never seen them before. Who has the locker next to you? Ryland asked. Empty, Sawyer said. It was broken for months. And the one on the other side? That's weird, Sawyer frowned. That belongs to Kyle. Ryland froze. She looked up slowly. Kyle? Kyle who? Kyle Steele, Sawyer said. The judge's son. We're on the same lacrosse team. The silence in the library was electric. Ryland dropped the file she was holding. It hit the floor with a slap that sounded like a gunshot. Kyle Steele, Ryland repeated, a dark smile forming on her lips. Of course. The arrogance, the rush to seal the case, the immediate offer of probation to make it go away. She scrambled up, grabbing a legal pad. Sawyer, tell me about Kyle. Does he use? Sawyer hesitated, looking down. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Sawyer, Ryland said, kneeling in front of him. They tried to send you to prison for 10 years. They tried to ruin your life to save him. You owe him nothing. Sawyer sighed, his shoulders slumping. Yeah, he deals. Prescription stuff mostly. Oxy. Perks. He keeps it in his gym bag. But that day, That day, the principal ordered a surprise locker sweep because of a theft in the locker room. And Kyle knew? His dad probably told him, Sawyer said bitterly. Or he panicked. If they searched his locker, he was dead. My locker is right next to his. Mine has a faulty latch. You can pop it open if you hit it hard enough. So he moved his stash, Rylan finished, her brain firing on all cylinders. He shoved it into your locker to hide it during the sweep, but then he couldn't get it back before the cops zeroed in on the anonymous tip. The tip, Rylan muttered, pacing again. The tip didn't come from a concerned citizen. It came from someone trying to direct the police away from Kyle and toward a specific target. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. Cora, it's Rylan. I need you to do something dangerous. Cora's voice came through, tinny and exhausted. More dangerous than defying Steele to his face? I need the school security footage, Rylan said. Not the hallway, the exterior, the parking lot. From Tuesday morning. The police seized all the footage, Cora said. It's in evidence. We won't get it until discovery is complete and they'll stall. Not the school's copy, Rylan said. The backup server. I looked up the district's IT contract. They use a cloud service that backs up off-site every 6 hours. If the police only seize the physical hard drives from the school, the cloud backup is still there. Rylan, that requires a subpoena to the cloud company. That takes weeks. Not if we have a parent request it regarding a safety incident involving their child, Rylan said. Sawyer's mom can request footage of her son's arrest. It's a FERPA right. You are terrifying, Cora said, a hint of admiration in her voice. I'm on it. 2 hours later, Rylan's laptop chimed. A video file appeared in her inbox. Rylan clicked play. The grainy footage showed the back entrance of the high school gym. The timestamp read 8:45 a.m. Tuesday. A silver BMW pulled up. A tall boy with the same sharp jawline as Judge Steele got out. He looked panicked. He opened the trunk, grabbed a duffel bag, and ran inside. Fast forward. 1:30 p.m. A black sedan arrived. A man in a suit got out. He wasn't a cop. He was Judge Steele. He met his son at the side door. They argued. Kyle was crying, gesturing wildly. Steele grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. Then, Steele took a phone from his pocket and made a call. 15 minutes later, Detective Miller's car pulled into the lot. Rylan paused the video. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding against her ribs. Gotcha, she whispered. It wasn't just a bad warrant. It wasn't just bias. It was a conspiracy. The judge had called the detective to frame a student to save his own son. She copied the file to 3 different encrypted drives. Then she emailed a copy to the district attorney's personal account, not Freya Hale, but the elected DA who hated scandals more than he loved convictions. Sawyer, Rylan said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. Get your suit. We're going back to court. Tomorrow? Sawyer asked. No, Rylan said, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. Now, I'm filing an emergency motion for recusal, and I'm going to make sure the whole world sees this video. The emergency hearing was granted at 4 p.m. The courthouse was usually winding down, but the rumors had spread. The girl lawyer found something. The gallery was packed this time. Reporters from the local news affiliates were setting up cameras in the hallway, barred from the courtroom but hungry for the story. Steele was back on the bench, looking more composed than he had in chambers, but there was a tightness around his eyes. He knew Rylan had filed something, but he hadn't seen the evidence yet. He assumed it was another procedural complaint. Freya Hale looked smug. She had probably spent the lunch break drafting a motion to have Rylan removed for incompetence. Ms. Black, Steele said, his voice dripping with condescension, I received your emergency request. I must say I am growing tired of your theatrics. What could possibly be so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? The integrity of this court, Your Honor, Rylan said. She didn't have her messenger bag this time. She had a laptop and a projector, which she had already set up on the defense table. We are not watching a movie, Steele snapped. State your motion. I move to disqualify Your Honor from this case pursuant to Judicial Canon 3E, Rylan said loudly. on the grounds of personal bias and actual involvement in the commission of the crime. The gallery gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Steele went purple. "You are treading on thin ice, counsel. Accusing a judge of a crime is grounds for immediate disbarment." "Then disbar me," Ryland challenged. "But watch the video first." "I will not, if you don't allow it," Ryland shouted over him. "I will play it for the press outside on the steps. The district attorney already has a copy. The State Ethics Commission has a copy." Steele froze. The mention of the DA and the Ethics Commission paralyzed him. If he stopped her now, it looked like a cover-up. If he let her play it, he was finished. He was trapped in the web he had spun. "Play it," he whispered, sinking back into his chair. He looked suddenly old, the granite crumbling into dust. Ryland hit the spacebar. The video projected onto the white wall behind the witness stand. The quality was clear enough. Everyone saw the silver BMW. Everyone saw Kyle Steele. Everyone saw the judge arrive. The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Then came the moment of the phone call. Ryland paused the video. "This call," Ryland narrated, her voice echoing in the dead silence, "was placed at 1:35 p.m. I subpoenaed the judge's phone records an hour ago. The call was to Detective Miller's personal cell phone. 10 minutes later, Miller arrived. 5 minutes after that, he entered the school. 30 minutes later, he found the drugs in Sawyer Knox's locker." Ryland turned to the gallery, then back to the bench. "Sawyer Knox is innocent," she declared. "He was the convenient neighbor, the sacrificial lamb used to protect the son of the most powerful man in this room." Freya Hale was staring at the screen, her face white as a sheet. She slowly started to inch away from the prosecution table, physically distancing herself from the judge. Steele sat motionless. He stared at the image of himself on the wall, the image of a father committing a crime to save a son, destroying another man's son in the process. "It's a lie," Steele croaked, but his voice had no power. "It's deep fake. It's AI." "The metadata is intact," Ryland said mercilessly. "The cloud server logs match. It's over, Dane." She didn't call him Your Honor. She stripped him of the title he had disgraced. "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Sawyer Knox," Ryland said, "and I move that this court be sealed as a crime scene." The back doors burst open, but it wasn't the bailiff this time. It was the district attorney, followed by 2 state troopers and a woman in a dark suit, the chair of the Judicial Conduct Board. The district attorney, a balding man with a grim expression, walked past Ryland and stopped before the bench. "Judge Steele," the DA said, his voice heavy, "please step down from the bench." Steele looked around the room. He saw the horror in the eyes of the gallery. He saw the disgust on Freya Hale's face. He saw the triumph in Sawyer Knox's tear-filled eyes. And finally, he looked at Ryland Black, the girl in the hoodie, the girl he had told to go back to the streets. She stood tall, her chin lifted, watching him with the impassive judgment of karma itself. Steele stood up. His legs were shaking. He fumbled with the zipper of his robe. He couldn't get it undone. He pulled harder, tearing the fabric, a desperate, pathetic sound that amplified the total collapse of his dignity. He stripped the robe off and threw it on the chair. He walked down the steps of the dais, not as a king, but as a suspect. As the state troopers moved in to handcuff him, Ryland leaned in close. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. "You were right, Judge," she whispered, her voice reaching only his ears. "This isn't a playground. It's a court of law, and you just got served." The holding cell in the basement of the courthouse was a stark contrast to the plush, mahogany-lined chambers Dane Steele had occupied for 2 decades. It was a cage of cinder block and cold steel, smelling of industrial cleaner and human misery. For the first time in his life, Dane Steele was on the wrong side of the bars. He sat on the narrow metal bench, still wearing his tailored suit trousers and dress shirt, though his tie had been confiscated as a suicide risk. The humiliation burned hotter than the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He wasn't a criminal. He was the law. This was a mistake, a temporary glitch in the matrix of his power. He kept telling himself that, muttering it under his breath like a prayer to a god who had long since stopped listening. "My lawyer is coming," he snapped at the guard passing by. "And when I get out of here, I'm going to have your badge." The guard, a man Steele had likely ignored for years, just chuckled. "Save it for the judge, inmate." Upstairs, the courthouse was in a state of pandemonium. The news of Steele's arrest had broken the internet. News vans from as far away as the state capitol were clogging the streets, their satellite dishes pointed like accusing fingers at the stone facade of the halls of justice. Rylan Black stood on the courthouse steps, shielding her eyes from the flashbulbs. Beside her stood Sawyer Knox, looking overwhelmed but free. His mother clutched his arm, weeping tears of relief. "Ms. Black! Ms. Black!" A reporter from Channel 5 shoved a microphone toward her. "Is it true that Judge Steele planted the drugs himself? Is it true he was protecting his son?" Rylan raised a hand, commanding silence with the same authority she had wielded in courtroom. The crowd hushed. "What is true?" Rylan said, her voice steady and amplified by the microphones, "is that the justice system is only as strong as the people we entrust to uphold it. Today, we saw what happens when that trust is betrayed. Sawyer Knox was a pawn in a game played by powerful men, but pawns can become queens if they make it to the other side of the board." Inside the district attorney's office, the mood was grim. Freya Hale sat across from the DA, her confident veneer completely shattered. She was smoking a cigarette, ignoring the "no smoking" sign on the wall. "I didn't know, Arthur," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I swear, I thought it was a standard possession case. Steele pushed it. He pushed everything." Arthur Vance, the district attorney and distant relation to the partner at Rylan's firm, looked at her with cold calculation. "You were the prosecutor, Freya. You pushed for maximum sentencing on a first offense. You mocked the defense counsel. You were complicit in a railroad job." "I was following the judge's lead," she cried. "Well, the judge is going down for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report," Vance said, leaning back. And unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator, you're going to testify against him. You're going to tell the grand jury every dirty trick, every ex parte communication, every unethical instruction he ever gave you." Freya slumped in her chair. She knew the game was up. Loyalty in politics was a currency that devalued instantly the moment the ship started sinking. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll give you everything." Back in the holding cell, the heavy door clanked open. Steele looked up, expecting the high-priced defense attorney he had demanded his wife call. Instead, a young public defender walked in. He looked barely out of law school, wearing an ill-fitting suit and carrying a battered briefcase. Steele stared at him. "Who are you? Where is Marcus Thorne?" The young man adjusted his glasses nervously. "Mr. Thorne declined to take your case, sir, as did the other 5 firms your wife contacted. It seems no one wants the conflict of interest or the publicity." "So I get you," Steele sneered. "A court-appointed incompetent?" The young lawyer stiffened. "I'm your counsel, Mr. Steele, unless you plan to represent yourself, but given the charges, I wouldn't advise it." Steele laughed. A dry, hollow sound. "I've forgotten more law than you've ever learned, boy. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. I am Dane Steele, and I am going to tear this case apart from the inside out." 3 months later, the preliminary hearing for the State versus Dane Steele began. It was held in the largest courtroom in the building, presided over by Judge Elena Rodriguez, a stern, no-nonsense jurist brought in from a neighboring county to ensure impartiality. The room was packed. Law students, reporters, and victims of Steele's past rulings filled every bench. Ryland sat in the front row, not as a lawyer this time, but as the star witness. Steele had made good on his threat. He was representing himself pro se. He sat at the defense table alone, surrounded by stacks of books, looking thinner, grayer, but with a fanatical glint in his eye. He believed he could talk his way out of this. He believed he was the smartest person in the room. The prosecution, led by a special prosecutor from the Attorney General's office, called Ryland to the stand. She walked up the aisle, her heels clicking rhythmically. She swore the oath, sat down, and adjusted the microphone. She wore a cream-colored suit this time, a visual representation of the light she was shining on the corruption. "Ms. Black," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of Tuesday, the 4th? Ryland recounted the story with surgical precision, the time-stamp discrepancies, the video footage, the phone records. She was calm, articulate, and devastatingly credible. Then it was Steele's turn to cross-examine. He stood up, smoothing his tie. He walked toward the witness stand, trying to summon his old intimidation tactics. He loomed over the railing, staring at Ryland. "Ms. Black," Steele began, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "you seem to have quite a vivid imagination for a junior associate. Tell me, isn't it true that you hold a personal grudge against me, that you came into my courtroom looking for a fight?" "I came into your courtroom looking for justice, Mr. Steele," Ryland corrected him calmly. "The fight was incidental." "Justice?" Steele scoffed. "You hacked into a private server to obtain video footage. You violated privacy laws. You manipulated the timeline to fit your narrative. Isn't it true that the video you showed was edited?" "The forensic metadata confirmed its authenticity," Ryland said, "as did the testimony of the IT director for the cloud service provider. The only manipulation, Mr. Steele, was you calling Detective Miller to frame a teenager." Steele's face twitched. "You claim I called him, but you have no recording of the conversation, just a log. Maybe I was calling to report a crime? Maybe I was calling to ask about a case?" "At the exact moment your son was crying in the parking lot?" Ryland asked, raising an eyebrow. "And 15 minutes before Miller arrived to search a locker that wasn't his jurisdiction? That is a statistical impossibility, and you know it. Res ipsa loquitur, Mr. Steele. The thing speaks for itself." "Don't quote Latin to me," Steele snapped, losing his cool. "I am a judge." "You were a judge," Ryland said, her voice cutting like a razor. "Now you are a defendant charged with a felony, and you are doing a very poor job of defending yourself." "I was protecting my family," Steele shouted, slamming his hand on the railing. "Any father would do the same. My son made a mistake. I wasn't going to let his life be ruined over a few pills." The courtroom gasped. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryland leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "And what about Sawyer Knox's life? What about his mother? What about the hundreds of other young men you sent away for a few pills without a second thought? You didn't do this as a father, Dane. You did it as a coward. You thought your son's future was worth more than Sawyer's because of his last name, because of your ego." Steele froze. He realized what he had said. He had just admitted motive in open court. He looked at the court reporter, his eyes wide. He looked at Judge Rodriguez, who was writing furiously in her notebook. I moved to strike that," Steele stammered. "Hypothetical. I was speaking hypothetically." "The record will stand," Judge Rodriguez ruled, her voice icy. "You opened the door, Mr. Steele. You walked right through it." Steele slumped back against the defense table. He looked at Ryland, and for the first time, there was no arrogance left, only fear. He saw the genius he had mocked, the delinquent he had tried to throw out. She hadn't just beaten him. She had induced him to destroy himself. Ryland stood up to leave the stand. As she passed him, she paused. "You asked me once if I was lost," she whispered. "I think you're the one who lost his way a long time ago." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the heartbeat of the city outside. "We, the jury," the foreman read, his hands shaking slightly, "find the defendant, Dane Steele, guilty on all counts. Guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of evidence tampering, guilty of conspiracy." Steele didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the deep lines of his face. The granite statue had finally crumbled into dust. Judge Rodriguez sentenced him 3 weeks later. She showed no leniency. "You held a position of sacred trust," she told him. "You used the law as a weapon to protect your own and attack the vulnerable. That is the ultimate betrayal of your oath. I sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary." As the bailiffs led Steele away in handcuffs, real ones this time, destined for a transport bus rather than a holding cell, he looked back. He searched the gallery until he found Rylan. She didn't look away. She didn't smile. She gave him a solemn nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. The balance had been restored. Outside, the spring air was crisp and clean. The media circus had moved on to the next scandal, leaving only a few dedicated reporters. Sawyer Knox was waiting by Rylan's car. He looked different now, taller. He was wearing a college sweatshirt. He had gotten his scholarship back after the exoneration. "It's really over," Sawyer said, looking at the courthouse. "I can't believe it." "It's over," Rylan agreed, unlocking her door. "How's Kyle?" "He's in rehab," Sawyer said. "Part of his plea deal. He testified against his dad, you know. That must have been hard." "The truth is usually hard," Rylan said. "That's why people like Steele try so hard to hide it." "So what now?" Sawyer asked. "You going back to the high-rise? Corporate mergers and billion-dollar deals?" Rylan looked up at the skyscraper in the distance where Sterling, Vance, and Partners had their offices. Then she looked back at the courthouse, at the people filing in and out. People who looked like Sawyer, people who looked like her, people who needed someone to stand in the gap. "Actually," Rylan smiled, the first genuine, carefree smile she had shown in months. "I put in my resignation this morning." Sawyer's jaw dropped. "What? Why? You're a legend there." "I'm opening my own firm," Rylan said, tossing her bag into the passenger seat. "Right here in the neighborhood. Black & Associates. Justice for the rest of us." "Associates?" Sawyer asked. "Who's the associate?" Rylan grinned. "I convinced Cora Sterling to quit the public defender's office. She's tired of being overworked and underappreciated. We're going to shake things up." She got into the car and rolled down the window. "Stay out of trouble, Sawyer." "Yes, ma'am," he saluted. "And Rylan?" "Yeah? Thanks for not sitting in the back." Rylan laughed, revving the engine. "I never sit in the back." She drove off, leaving the shadow of the courthouse behind her, driving toward a future she would carve out with her own hands, one case, one battle, one impossible victory at a time. The fall of Dane Steele sent shockwaves through the legal system. It forced a statewide review of all anonymous tip warrants and led to the overturning of nearly 50 wrongful convictions presided over by Steele. Rylan Black didn't just win a case, she started a movement. Her story reminds us that authority does not equal morality and that the clothes we wear, or the color of our skin, have no bearing on our brilliance. Steele saw a thug in a hoodie. The world saw a genius in disguise. He underestimated her because of his prejudice, and that prejudice became the architect of his demise. Karma isn't just a cosmic force. Sometimes it's a 19-year-old girl with a law degree and a refusal to back down. What a journey. From being threatened with contempt to taking down the most powerful judge in the city, Rylan Black proved that true power comes from knowing who you are and fighting for what's right. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more stories where the underdog bites back, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a upload. What would you have done if you were in Ryland's shoes? Would you have stood your ground against Judge Steele? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, never judge a book by its cover, because you never know when that book might throw the book at you.